Brand new piece now in water news, written by someone you know from the show, our water expert, Dr. Tricia Stadnyk from the University of Calgary, professor and research chair in hydraulic modeling with the Schulich School of Engineering. New piece in the water news, official magazine of the Canadian Water Resources Association, on some of the lessons other communities, other cities can learn from what we went through in the summer. Welcome back to the show, Doctor.
Hi, how are you doing, Sarah?
I'm good, Tricia. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great.
I asked a few minutes ago, I said, share your stories if your water behavior has changed and stayed different since the summer. So I'll see what comes trickling in.
Yeah.
I will tell you this. When I am brushing my teeth, when I am washing our dishes in the kitchen, I do turn off the water now and just soap everything up versus back in the day when I would have just let that sucker run for 17 minutes.
Yay! Progress!
Progress!
That's great. Yeah, that's one of the recommendations that I made is like to rethink what normal is, right? And I know that's a conversation you've been having with your listeners.
Well, because what we used to do is not necessarily what we should be doing moving forward. And so maybe we don't want to let it mellow yellow in the toilets every day of our life. But we learned in the summer that very small things in each home can have a pooling giant effect when we need to conserve water.
Well, that's just it, right? Like, it's the sum of all the parts. And if everyone just committed to doing one small thing, it would be amazing to see how that would add up. You know, we could actually make it fun and make it like a intercity challenge or something. But yeah, like, you don't have to go to the extreme. Just small everyday actions can really make a big difference when we all do it together.
So in the water news, one of the things you talk about is little changes that people need to make. And I think what's interesting is if you actually asked younger people, I don't know if they would know that you're supposed to turn the tap off while you're brushing your teeth, or you don't need to have the shower going the whole time. And I know that sounds silly, but that's not something you would learn in school. It's not something you might have had to confront at any time in your life. So disaster fatigue and how we behave around water is something everyone can learn a little bit more about.
Absolutely. And this is really about trying to get the message out to all Canadians, but particularly Albertans, that we really have to change the way in which we're behaving if we hope to continue to grow our economy and our population like we have been, because water is finite. We're not going to be able to create any more of it. And we all want, to be healthy, and we all want to have good jobs and non-restricted growth. But we can't do that when the limiting factor is water. And look, depending on where you were raised in the world, these behaviors have either been ingrained in childhood or they haven't. It's interesting you say, I highly doubt that young people would necessarily know to turn the taps off. But other parts of the world, they absolutely do.
In the piece as well, it's not all on us and what we're doing. One of the lessons learned for other places is about the communication of either a catastrophe or daily water use. And I think that, as positions are open to become a city councillor in the city, and as people think about what their future is, communication is such a huge part of how our city talks to us, because we ended up in a little bit of a situation this summer where it was at one point, homeowners against car washes, and we didn't have to have that antagonistic problem at the same time as conserving water.
No, absolutely. And ultimately, this comes down to good quality information, misinformation, disinformation being combated. We know in the water world that majority of car washes actually recycle and reuse their water, gray water reuse systems. The average public person doesn't necessarily know how water is used. And so I implore everybody, first of all, before jumping to conclusions, don't make assumptions, get the facts. But second of all, I think it's incumbent on our city officials and our elected leaders to really emphasize clear and concise and accurate information from the get-go to help dispel some of this pitting one sector against another. We're all in this together, and that message needs to be loud and clear from the beginning.
So the first lesson is disaster fatigue and maintaining good water use. The second lesson is communication. And then I think the third one is sort of like the weightiest, the biggest one, and that is investment into monitoring, maintenance, and rehabilitation of our water systems.
Yeah, so this is also a message for our elected officials and city councillors, not just within the city, but within the province as well as the federal government. Look, we saw that these kinds of disasters not only create public discourse and unhappiness and communication issues, but they also cost a lot of money, not only with the infrastructure itself and the tight timelines for repair and the overtime and the parts, but also in terms of looking at long-term solutions and not having the time to do that and having to make rush-to-judgment decisions. If we invest in a good state of repair ahead of time, we make smarter and better decisions with the state-of-the-art research, and we can hopefully avoid disaster in the first place from happening.
I guess the thing about monitoring, maintenance, and rehabilitation of our water systems, though, is for the person listening right now, or the Calgarian, Cochranate, whoever it is who's thinking like, oh, well, how does that work? How do we actually know that our water systems are being taken care of, other than being able to trust what our public officials are telling us?
Yeah, I mean, a large part of it is trusting the public officials. And, hey, I'm not saying that there's any evidence that they're not communicating with us. These reports are publicly available for the technical, savvy people that want to follow it. But a large part of it is just being an involved citizen and understanding that our taxpayers, when our taxes go, as taxpayers, when our taxes go up, there are sometimes good reasons for that. And if you don't like it, go to City Hall and listen and understand, or at least invest in understanding where that money is going, and also advocate for the things that you think tax dollars do need to be spent on. You know, if we're all more involved in these kinds of decisions and in helping to advocate for good decisions, then hopefully we can collectively increase the amount of spending that goes to these kind of unsexy furnace room type things. You know, I call it a furnace room because nobody buys a house for the furnace, yet fundamentally that's probably the single most important part of your house. That's where your sump pump is, that's where your backwater valve is, that's where the nuts and bolts of the house that determine whether it's a lemon or not reside. But the reality is most of us buy it for the fancy kitchen.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're swooning over the wine rack, and meanwhile, down in the basement, the furnace is about to conk out.
Correct. So, you know, let's not stick our heads in the sand. Just because we don't see it doesn't mean it's not a problem.
In the water news, Dr. Tricia Stadnyk, professor and research chair in hydraulic modeling with the Schulich School of Engineering, University of Calgary, has outlined different lessons that can be learned from what we went through this past summer with our water main. Have you heard, Tricia, from other communities in Canada, other communities in the States, or even further beyond? Thank you so much. What can we do? Or you saved us from having our own moment. Have other places actually learned from what Calgary experienced?
Yeah, look, I haven't directly, and I don't expect to, but I do know from my friends that work in water at the City of Calgary that they absolutely have been talking and communicating with other jurisdictions. And I think those jurisdictions are very interested in doing things more proactively so they don't find themselves in the same kind of situation that the City of Calgary found themselves in. And I certainly know that the City of Calgary is looking at lessons learned and trying to move forward in a good way. Despite the inconvenience and the disaster fatigue, this is exactly why the additional repairs happened to the pipeline in a timely fashion back at the end of August and early September. And I know that it was hot on the heels of a previous cutback and no one wanted to, but there was good reasons for doing those repairs at that time. And that was to not land us in another disaster situation when there wasn't enough water in the Elbow River to supply the entire City of Calgary.
You and your family were already water savvy. You were already doing the things before we were told to do the things. Have you stepped it up even more where the Stadnyk household is far more water conservative? Or what else do you do to be part of the solution here? What is your home like?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the answer to that is yes. Just the other day, the kids and I were talking about water conservation and water use. Not leaving the taps running is a big one, and thinking about whether or not we really need to flush. So we do have a tendency when it's just our family at home, like over the holidays, to, if it's yellow, let it mellow. And then my daughter was asking, if I take a bath, can I leave the water in there and use it to flush the toilet? I'm like, absolutely, go for it. So habits have changed, discussions have started, and that's a really important first step, I think.
Your daughter is going to be the next chair in research in hydraulic modeling with the Schulich School of Engineering if she's thinking like that when she's just a little muffin.
Yeah, she's only 9 years old, and, she was getting mad at some of her friends at school for leaving the taps on when they were washing their hands. I'm like, okay, maybe we don't need to yell at other people, but information is good.
Information is always good. When we hide from information, that's when problems start to percolate. So maybe your 9-year-old is going to be a little bit of a change maker in the world, and I think that's a great thing for a 9-year-old to be. I
think all kids have that potential, right? And that's where it starts. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. A brand new piece in the Water News from Tricia Stadnyk, professor at the University of Calgary in the Schulich School of Engineering as well. Thanks, as always, for joining us, Tricia.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.